Jonas Vale had chosen the settlement of Orith's Reach because almost nobody there knew what a human war veteran looked like, and those who did were polite enough to pretend otherwise. The colony clung to the edge of a blue-white canyon beneath 3 small moons, its towers grown from translucent stone and linked by magnetic bridges that hummed whenever the wind changed direction. Jonas lived in a narrow maintenance house beyond the royal district, repaired agricultural drones for farmers who paid him in credits, vegetables, or occasionally suspicious jars of something that moved when no one was watching. He liked the work because machines rarely asked about medals, scars, or why a man woke before dawn with his hand reaching for a rifle that had not been beside his bed in 12 years. Every afternoon, after finishing his repairs, he walked through the public gardens toward the old transport station. That was where he first noticed the girl. She sat beneath a silver-leaf tree in a floating mobility chair, watching other children chase a cluster of luminous insects across the grass. She looked almost human, with pale skin, bright gray eyes, and long, pointed ears, rising through carefully braided golden hair. Only the delicate blue patterns along her temples and the faint glow beneath her skin revealed that she belonged to the Illyrian royal bloodline. 2 palace attendants stood behind her, stiff as decorative spears, while a medical drone hovered nearby and repeated her pulse rate every 30 seconds in a voice so solemn that Jonas expected it to announce the end of civilization. The girl never joined the games. She only watched. On the 4th day, Jonas stopped beside her chair and said, "That drone sounds worried." The girl turned sharply. The attendants looked even more alarmed than the machine. "It always sounds worried," she replied. "Yesterday it warned me that my breathing was unusually regular." Jonas nodded gravely. "Dangerous habit. Breathing leads to all sorts of trouble." For a heartbeat, she stared at him, unsure whether humans were naturally foolish. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. The medical drone rotated toward Jonas. "Unregistered individual. Maintain a respectful distance from Her Highness." Jonas stepped back exactly 1 centimeter. "There. Respectful enough?" The girl laughed softly, and both attendants looked as though laughter had not been included in their security training. Her name was Princess Lyra, though she asked him not to call her that. A rare neurological disorder had interrupted the signals between her brain and lower body since birth. The palace possessed tissue printers, neural stimulators, gravity therapy chambers, and physicians educated on 7 worlds, but none had found a cure. Jonas did not offer pity. He asked whether she liked the insects. Lyra said they were called emberwings, and that she had never touched one because the attendants considered them unhygienic. Jonas glanced at the guards. "They also consider sandwiches dangerous." "Only the ones you humans make," one attendant muttered. Jonas liked him immediately. Over the following days, he began stopping beneath the tree. He told Lyra about Earth oceans, military cooks, and a captain who once tried to surrender to a malfunctioning vending machine. She told him about palace lessons, diplomatic ceremonies, and the terrible burden of pretending to enjoy royal music performed on instruments that sounded like injured plumbing. Their conversations became the only part of Jonas's day he secretly anticipated. Then, one afternoon, he found Lyra alone, except for the attendants, staring toward the park beyond the palace wall. Children were launching small anti-gravity kites, their laughter carried on the warm air. "Have you ever gone there?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "My chair cannot cross the old stone path. Its stabilizers fail near the magnetic roots." Jonas examined the narrow trail winding beneath the silver trees. "That sounds like a design flaw. The path is 900 years old." "Then the path has had plenty of time to apologize." Lyra smiled, but sadness remained in her eyes. Jonas crouched in front of her. "I can carry you." The attendants protested at once. The medical drone began listing 23 possible risks, including embarrassment, muscle strain, diplomatic misunderstanding, and something called ceremonial imbalance. Jonas waited until it finished. "Anything serious?" Lyra looked from him to the distant park. "You would carry me on your back?" "I was infantry. Carrying royalty is probably lighter than carrying ammunition." "I am not heavy." "Excellent. Ammunition never argued either." She laughed again, louder this time. After several nervous minutes, the attendants reluctantly helped her from the chair. Jonas felt how thin her legs were, how carefully she tried to hide her fear as she placed her arms around his shoulders. He rose slowly, steadying her beneath the knees. For a moment, Lyra said nothing. From this height, the world had changed. She could see over the garden wall, beyond the trees, all the way to the bright fountains and floating kites. "Ready?" Jonas asked. Her grip tightened. "Yes." He carried her down the ancient path while the attendants followed in horrified silence, and the medical drone flew beside them, shouting increasingly dramatic warnings. When they reached the park, an ember wing landed on Lyra's hand. Its glowing wings opened like a tiny sunrise. She stared at it, breathless, then whispered, "It is warm." Jonas smiled. Most forbidden things are. For the first time in years, Princess Lyra forgot to feel like a patient, and Jonas Vale forgot that he had come to Orith's Reach to be alone. The journey to the park should have remained a single act of rebellion, quietly buried beneath palace paperwork and the professional embarrassment of two royal attendants. Instead, Lyra was waiting beneath the silver-leaf tree the next afternoon, with her arms folded, and an expression Jonas recognized from military officers who had already decided what orders they intended to ignore. Her floating chair rested beside her, polished, until its white surface reflected the 3 moons hanging faintly in the daylight. "You are late," she said. Jonas glanced at the sun. "By 11 seconds. 12. Then I am ashamed. My military discipline has collapsed." The medical drone drifted closer. Human punctuality remains below acceptable royal standards. Jonas looked at it. "You are still here?" "I am assigned permanently. My condolences." One of the attendants coughed to hide a laugh. His name was Teren, a narrow-faced Illyrian with long ears, and the patient misery of a man who had spent years standing beside formal ceremonies. The other attendant, Mara, was younger and much less willing to pretend that Jonas's presence was acceptable. She held a security scanner in one hand and watched him as though he might suddenly kidnap the princess, overthrow the government, and steal a decorative fountain on the way out. "Yesterday was unauthorized," Mara said. "Today will also be unauthorized," Lyra replied brightly. "At least we are becoming consistent." Jonas crouched beside the chair. "Your Highness, I fear you may be a bad influence. You taught me. Then civilization is doomed." This time even Mara's mouth twitched. They repeated the ritual carefully. Teren disengaged the chair's support field. Mara monitored Lyra's vitals, and Jonas turned his back so the girl could place her arms around his shoulders. She was less frightened than before, though her fingers still tightened whenever he stood. The medical drone immediately announced that her heart rate had risen by 14%. "That is because you keep shouting about it," Jonas said. "Audible warnings improve emergency awareness. You could improve it further by flying into a lake." The drone processed this suggestion for several seconds. Request denied. Their second visit lasted only 20 minutes, but the third stretched to an hour. By the end of the week, their afternoons had settled into a routine. Jonas carried Lyra along the ancient path while the attendants followed, pretending the arrangement had received official approval from someone important. In the park, Lyra discovered that ordinary children did not bow before speaking to her. Most did not recognize her at all without the jeweled crest normally attached to her chair. They asked why she rode on the human's back. She told them he was a primitive transport animal from Earth. Jonas responded that his species required payment in pastries. The next day, 3 children arrived with honey cakes. Lyra laughed so hard that Mara had to check whether she was choking. They fed ember wings from their palms, watched mechanical fish leap through the fountain, and raced miniature robotic animals across the grass. Jonas purchased an outdated maintenance bot shaped like a 6-legged rodent from a market stall. Its left eye blinked constantly, and it moved in circles whenever anyone gave it a direct command. Lyra named it General Whiskers. "Why General?" Jonas asked as the machine crashed into a bench. "It ignores instructions and creates extra work for everyone." Teren stared at her. "You have been studying the Royal Army." On another afternoon, Jonas showed her how to launch an anti-gravity kite. The device rose too quickly, wrapped its control thread around a statue of Lyra's great-grandfather, and pulled the bronze emperor's ceremonial crown sideways. Mara turned pale. Teren examined the damage and said, "After 900 years, His Majesty finally looks interesting." Jonas decided the man had hidden talents. The changes in Lyra were small at first. She spoke more loudly. She began requesting outdoor meals. Her appetite improved, and she stopped allowing servants to choose every part of her day. More surprisingly, the neural sensors woven into her clothing detected faint responses in muscles that had remained nearly silent for years. The palace physicians assumed the equipment was malfunctioning. They recalibrated the scanners 3 times and blamed solar interference, atmospheric pressure, and, briefly, human proximity. Jonas found that last explanation flattering. Inside the palace, however, Queen Elara noticed something no scanner could measure. Her daughter had begun returning each evening with leaves in her hair, dirt on her sleeves, and stories that did not involve hospitals. Lyra spoke constantly about Jonas, though she described him only as the old human. Jonas would have objected to the word old had he known. Elara listened without interrupting, her elegant face calm beneath a crown of dark crystal. Like her daughter, she appeared almost human, with pale skin, silver-gray eyes, and long pointed ears rising through golden hair. Yet her stillness belonged to someone who had ruled through assassinations, border wars, and 12 years of diplomatic dinners. "And who authorized these visits?" she finally asked. Lyra considered the question. "No one." "Who accompanies you?" "Teren, Mara, and the anxious metal bird." "The medical drone?" "Jonas says it has the personality of an evacuation alarm." The Queen nearly smiled, which caused the nearest advisor to look alarmed. Later that night, she summoned the captain of palace intelligence. "Find the human," she ordered. Quietly, the captain bowed. "Do you believe he is dangerous?" Elara looked toward the garden windows, where her daughter's laughter still seemed to linger. "I believe," she said slowly, "that anyone capable of changing Lyra's world without asking permission deserves to be understood." The investigation began before midnight. Yet when the intelligence network searched for Jonas Vale, it found something strange. His employment records were ordinary, his residence permit was valid, and his repair license listed him as a retired technician. But everything before his arrival on Orith's Reach had been sealed behind military encryption so old that the palace computers did not recognize the authority that created it. In a dark room beneath the royal tower, an analyst stared at the locked file while a forgotten human insignia appeared on the screen. It belonged to a unit officially erased from history. Above the city, unaware that anyone was searching for him, Jonas carried Lyra home beneath the rising moons, while she argued that General Whiskers deserved a palace command. "He has already attacked a bench, a fountain, and an emperor," Jonas said. "That is a strong political resume," Lyra replied. Queen Elara had spent years learning how to enter a room without announcing herself. It was a useful skill for a ruler, especially when half the court lied more confidently in her presence, and the other half forgot how to speak at all. That afternoon, she left the palace through a maintenance corridor wearing a plain gray cloak over a simple civilian dress, her golden hair braided tightly behind her long, pointed ears. No crown, no royal guards, no ceremonial jewels. Only a thin security bracelet around her wrist, and Captain Teren following 3 streets behind, pretending to inspect public lighting fixtures with the subtlety of an armed statue. Elara reached the park before Lyra arrived and chose a bench beneath a cluster of floating crystal trees. Their roots never touched the ground. They hovered a meter above the grass, supported by ancient magnetic fields that made the leaves chime softly whenever the wind passed through them. From there, she could see the old stone path leading from the palace gardens. She waited in silence, though silence did not come easily. Around her, children launched anti-gravity kites, vendors sold frozen nebula fruit, and a mechanical musician played a cheerful melody on 6 silver pipes. One pipe was badly out of tune. Elara resisted the urge to have it arrested. Then Jonas appeared. He walked slowly down the path with Lyra on his back, her arms looped around his shoulders and her face bright with anticipation. Teren and Mara followed several steps behind, both trying very hard to look as though carrying the heir to the throne through a public park was a standard medical procedure. The medical drone hovered beside them, broadcasting warnings to everyone within hearing distance. Surface instability detected. Jonas looked down at the perfectly level path. You mean the ground? Affirmative. Remarkable. Alert the Geological Council. Lyra laughed against his shoulder. Elara's breath caught. She had heard her daughter smile before, politely and carefully, in the presence of physicians and ambassadors. This was different. The sound was uncontrolled, warm, almost reckless. It seemed to belong to another child entirely. Jonas carried her toward the fountain, where General Whiskers was already spinning in circles near a flower bed. The tiny maintenance bot collided with Jonas's boot, reversed direction, and charged directly at the medical drone. Defensive protocol engaged, the drone announced. You are being attacked by a toy, Jonas said. Threat classification remains under review. Lyra clapped as General Whiskers rammed the drone a second time. Elara lowered her gaze, hiding a smile she had not expected. For the next hour, she watched Jonas treat Lyra in a way no one else dared. He did not adjust her blankets every few minutes or ask whether she was tired after every movement. He listened when she spoke. He argued with her. He told her when her ideas were terrible, then helped her attempt them anyway. When she demanded to launch 2 anti-gravity kites at once, he warned that the last experiment had nearly dishonored an emperor. He survived, Lyra said. He is a statue. Exactly. Very durable. They launched both kites. One rose gracefully. The other dove into a vendor's canopy and showered Jonas with blue frozen fruit. Lyra stared at him for one silent second before bursting into laughter so violently that she nearly slipped from the bench where he had placed her. Jonas stood beneath the ruined canopy with purple juice running down his face. I am pleased this tragedy has improved morale. Even Mara laughed. Elara did not realize she had risen until Captain Teren's voice whispered through her bracelet. Your Majesty, you are exposed. I am in a public park, not an artillery field. Historically, those have overlapped. She ignored him and moved closer. Jonas was kneeling beside Lyra, wiping fruit from her sleeve. The girl's laughter had softened into breathless giggles, but her eyes still shone. Elara stopped behind a crystal tree and watched her daughter lean forward to place one hand on Jonas's shoulder. Lyra's lower leg moved. It was barely more than a tremor, a tiny, involuntary response beneath the fabric of her dress, but Elara saw it clearly. So did the medical drone. Its lights flashed red. Unexpected neuromuscular activity detected. The laughter stopped. Mara stepped forward, frightened, but Jonas raised one hand. Lyra, look at me. The girl's face had gone pale. Did I do something wrong? No. His voice was calm, steady in a way Elara recognized from battlefield commanders and emergency surgeons. Your leg moved, that is all. We are not declaring war on it. Lyra swallowed. It has never moved like that. Then perhaps it was bored. Her fear eased by a fraction. Jonas did not celebrate, did not fill her with impossible promises. He simply asked whether she wanted to try again. Lyra closed her eyes and concentrated until a faint tremor passed through her foot. This time she laughed first. Elara turned away before anyone could see the tears in her eyes. By sunset, she was back in the palace, seated beneath the luminous ceiling of the intelligence chamber. A holographic image of Jonas floated above the central table. Around it, streams of sealed data flashed red and vanished behind layers of archaic encryption. His civilian records are false, Captain Teren said. Not forged, constructed legally by an authority that no longer exists. What authority? Elara asked. The captain touched the display. A faded human insignia appeared, a black star crossed by a silver blade. The room fell silent. The Ash Meridian, Teren said. A special operations unit erased after the Varen War. Elara stared at the symbol. She remembered it from stories told only in locked rooms, stories of a human commander who had entered the burning heart of the Empire and never returned. Open the file. We cannot. The encryption is tied to a dead military network. Then wake it. Teren hesitated. Your Majesty, Some records are buried because someone feared what would happen if they were found. Elara looked toward the distant windows, beyond which Lyra was still talking excitedly about blue fruit and rebellious machines. "And some are buried," she said, "because powerful people are ashamed of whom they forgot." Deep beneath the palace, dormant systems began searching for a war that history had tried to erase. The palace archive had not awakened willingly. Its oldest memory vault lay beneath 6 armored floors, sealed inside a chamber built before Orith's reach had possessed a sky elevator or reliable plumbing. When Captain Teren activated the dormant system, the walls filled with pale holographic symbols, and a synthetic voice announced that the archive had been offline for 41 years, 3 months, and 9 days. Then it demanded a password from an emperor who had been dead for nearly half a century. "Try eternal glory," Teren suggested. Queen Elara looked at him. Was my grandfather truly that predictable? He named 3 warships after himself. The password worked. Dust drifted from the ceiling as ancient processors began humming, their quantum cores slowly reconnecting to military networks long since dismantled. Elara stood before the central console while fragments of the Varen War assembled around her in ghostly blue light. Burning cities, shattered orbital stations, troop transports falling through red clouds. She had been young then, too young to understand why the palace windows had glowed every night or why her mother had stopped sleeping. Official history claimed the Empire survived because its fleet broke the Varen siege above the moon of Kalis. The archive told another story. The fleet had been hours from collapse. Varen warships had surrounded the Imperial capital and activated a planet killer hidden inside the moon's core. Every conventional assault failed. Then a human special operations unit called the Ash Meridian volunteered to enter the weapon through a maintenance shaft no larger than a cargo tunnel. 12 soldiers went in. 1 came out. Elara watched a helmet recording flicker into existence. The image shook violently as gunfire illuminated a narrow corridor. A younger Jonas Vale moved through smoke in black combat armor, one shoulder burned, his face streaked with blood. He carried an injured Illyrian officer while shouting coordinates to a ship that no longer answered. Behind him, the moon's core pulsed like an artificial sun. "Commander," a voice crackled over the recording, "detonation in 6 minutes." Jonas did not slow. Then someone has made the schedule unnecessarily dramatic. Even decades younger and surrounded by death, he sounded exactly the same. Elara moved closer to the hologram. The injured officer in his arms wore the crest of the Royal Guard. She recognized him after a moment. General Averin, her mother's closest protector, and the man who had later told the court that no human survived the mission. The recording continued. Jonas reached the control chamber, transferred Averin to an escape capsule, and manually redirected the planet killer's energy into the Varen fleet. He remained behind to hold the collapsing system stable until the capsule launched. The final image showed him alone beside a failing reactor, laughing weakly as warning lights flashed around him. "I always hated moons," he muttered. Then the transmission ended. Elara stared at the darkness left behind. "He survived," she whispered. Teren opened another file. Barely. A scavenger vessel found him 17 days later inside a fragment of the moon. His injuries required extensive reconstruction. The human military classified everything, then erased the unit after political negotiations with the Varens. And our empire accepted that? Our empire claimed the victory for itself. The words entered the room like a blade. Elara turned toward the surviving reports. Ministers had known. Admirals had known. Her own family had known enough to build monuments to commanders who had never entered the moon, while the man who saved them disappeared into anonymity. By morning, Jonas's sealed record had become the most guarded file in the palace. Elara read every page. 23 operations, 7 injuries officially considered fatal, and 1 resignation request containing the sentence, "I would like to spend the remainder of my life repairing things that do not shoot back." At the same hour, the subject of the investigation was kneeling in his workshop with General Whiskers open across his workbench. Lyra sat nearby in her floating chair, supervising with the seriousness of an admiral. "You have connected that wire incorrectly," she said. "I have repaired military reactors under bombardment. And yet General Whiskers still walks into walls. He has principles." Jonas tightened a small magnetic coupling. The robot sprang upright, raced across the bench, and launched itself into a bucket of cleaning fluid. Lyra covered her mouth, but the laughter escaped anyway. "A tactical retreat," Jonas said. The workshop door opened. Teren entered first, unusually stiff, followed by Queen Elara in full royal dress. Her golden hair fell over polished silver armor, and a narrow crystal crown framed her long pointed ears. Jonas rose slowly. Lyra looked between them. "Jonas, this is my mother." "I had reached that conclusion," he said. The crown was a subtle clue. Elara studied his face, searching for the commander from the recording beneath the older features and quiet eyes. He looked ordinary, almost deliberately so. That made the truth harder to bear. "Commander Vale," she said. The workshop became still. Jonas's expression changed only slightly, but Lyra noticed. "No one has called me that in a long time." "I know who you are." "That sounds expensive." Elara took another step. "You saved my empire." Jonas glanced at Lyra, then at the half-drowned machine dripping onto his floor. "Today, I was hoping to save a robot." "Why did you never return?" she asked. "To the palace? I was not invited. To claim recognition." His faint smile vanished. "Recognition does not bring back the people who died beside you." Elara had prepared questions, apologies, perhaps even a formal declaration of gratitude. None survived the weight of his answer. Lyra reached toward him, and Jonas placed a hand over hers. The gesture was simple, protective, familiar. Elara understood then that the Empire's forgotten hero had not returned for medals, power, or revenge. He had returned unknowingly, carrying its lonely princess through a park because she wanted to see glowing insects. "You should have been honored," Elara said quietly. Jonas looked at the ruined maintenance bot. "I have learned to lower my expectations." General Whiskers suddenly activated, sprayed cleaning fluid across the Queen's polished boots, and collapsed again. Lyra burst into helpless laughter. Elara looked down at the spreading foam, then at Jonas. "Is this how humanity greets royalty?" "Only the important ones," he said. For 3 days after the Queen's visit, Jonas waited for the palace to ruin everything. He expected officials, ceremonial invitations, perhaps a squadron of historians carrying recording devices and questions beginning with, "How did it feel to save civilization?" Instead, nothing happened. Lyra still arrived each afternoon beneath the silver-leafed tree. Teren still pretended their trips had been authorized. Mara still scanned Jonas for hidden weapons, though by now she did it with the weary expression of someone checking a cupboard she already knew was empty. Even the medical drone continued hovering beside them, announcing dangers with undiminished enthusiasm. "Elevated pollen detected," it warned as Jonas lifted Lyra onto his back. "Possible respiratory irritation." "We are outdoors," Jonas said. "There is nature here." "Nature remains insufficiently regulated." "Have you considered a career in government?" The drone's lights blinked. "Career transfer unavailable." Lyra laughed into his shoulder, but Jonas noticed she was quieter than usual. Since learning that her mother knew his identity, a question had settled behind her eyes. She waited until they reached the park before asking it. "Did you really save the Empire?" Jonas lowered her carefully onto the bench beside the glowing fountain. "Your mother has been reading old records." "That is not an answer. It is an observation." "Jonas," he sighed. "I helped." Lyra narrowed her silver-gray eyes. "Mother said you entered a moon that was exploding." "It was not exploding when I entered." "That makes it better?" "Slightly." She studied him in solemn silence, then asked, "Were you frightened?" Jonas looked toward the ember wings drifting above the grass. He could have lied. Adults often lied to children when truth felt too heavy, and royal children were surrounded by more careful lies than most. "Yes," he said. Very. Lyra seemed surprised. Heroes are not supposed to be frightened. That was probably written by someone who stayed home. Her gaze dropped to her motionless legs. I am frightened all the time. Jonas sat beside her. Then you are more heroic than most people I served with. She leaned against his arm, and neither spoke for a while. Across the park, General Whiskers pursued a cleaning drone twice his size and lost the battle decisively. The moment ended when a shadow crossed the grass. Queen Elara approached without a crown, dressed in a pale traveling coat instead of armor. 2 distant guards followed, but she waved them away before sitting on the opposite end of the bench. I thought rulers traveled with trumpets, Jonas said. Only when we want enemies to know exactly where to aim. Efficient tradition. Lyra looked delighted. Are you coming with us? Elara hesitated. Would that be permitted? No, Jonas said. But unauthorized visits are our specialty. They walked deeper into the park, Jonas carrying Lyra, while Elara moved beside them. Without the court surrounding her, the queen appeared younger, though the exhaustion in her eyes remained. She asked Jonas about his life after the war. He told her about cargo work, repair stations, and one unfortunate year maintaining sewage processors on Mars. After surviving a planet killer, you repaired waste systems? She asked. They were less temperamental than admirals. Elara smiled before she could stop herself. It transformed her face so completely that Jonas nearly missed a step. Lyra noticed and looked between them with suspicious interest. Mother never laughs at council meetings. Perhaps the council is not funny, Jonas said. Minister Vale's hair is. Lyra, Elara warned. It rises when he is angry. That is a defensive mechanism, Jonas said gravely, common among frightened animals. The queen laughed then, quietly but genuinely, and Lyra beamed as though she had achieved a military victory. They stopped near a lake where small silver creatures swam through the air above the water, leaving ripples of light behind them. Elara watched Jonas settle Lyra on a low platform built around an ancient tree. You never asked her what she could not do, she said softly. Everyone else begins there. Soldiers learn quickly that knowing what someone can do is more useful. She trusts you. She trusts you too. Elara's expression tightened. She loves me. That is not always the same. Before Jonas could answer, his old combat instincts stirred. A metallic click came from the trees, too precise for a bird, too controlled for park machinery. He turned as a black surveillance sphere rose from behind the branches, its lens fixed on them. Mara drew her weapon, but the sphere shot upward and vanished between the towers. Elara's bracelet flashed with an incoming report. Her face hardened as she read it. Someone accessed the sealed archive, she said. Jonas's file has been copied. Who? Teren asked. Unknown. Jonas looked toward the sky, where transport lanes glowed above the city. Not unknown for long. Elara's guards closed around them. The park suddenly seemed too open, too bright, too full of hiding places. Lyra reached for Jonas, and he lifted her without hesitation. Are we in danger? She whispered. Possibly. That drone always says we are. For once it may be right. The medical drone rotated proudly. Previous warnings validated. Jonas stared at it. Do not enjoy this. They returned to the palace under armed escort. By sunset, encrypted messages were spreading across the empire. A forgotten human commander was alive. The man who had saved Illyria walked unguarded through public streets. Some called him a hero. Others called him a political weapon. In the highest towers, ambitious nobles began calculating what his existence could destroy. In the lowest districts, old soldiers raised glasses to a name they thought had died with them. And inside Lyra's chamber, far from the growing storm, Jonas placed her in bed while she watched him anxiously. Will you still take me to the park tomorrow? She asked. He looked toward the windows, where royal gunships had begun patrolling the night sky. Of course, even if dangerous people come? Especially then. Lyra smiled. General Whiskers can protect us. From the corridor came a crash, followed by an alarm and Teren shouting that the robot had attacked another statue. Jonas nodded. The enemy does not stand a chance. By morning, the palace had become a fortress, disguised as a residence. Security fields shimmered across every entrance, royal interceptors circled above the towers, and armed guards stood in corridors previously defended only by portraits and expensive furniture. Jonas disliked fortresses. They encouraged people to believe danger always came from outside. He was standing beside Lyra's mobility chair when 3 ministers entered her chamber with the confidence of people who had never been told to leave. Minister Vale came first, his silver ceremonial robes stiff with authority and his remarkable hair rising above his forehead like a frightened sea creature. 2 physicians followed him, carrying holographic tablets filled with Lyra's medical data. The princess's excursions must stop immediately, Vale declared. Lyra folded her arms. No. The minister blinked. Royal children were apparently not supposed to answer so efficiently. Your Highness, the security threat is severe. Then make security less terrible. Jonas looked toward Teren. She has a future in command. Or taxation, Teren replied. Vale turned on Jonas. You are the source of this crisis. That is unfair. I have caused much better crises. The minister's hair seemed to rise another centimeter. Queen Elara entered before he could respond. She wore silver armor beneath a dark blue cloak, and every guard in the room straightened. Explain, she said. Vale immediately became less impressive. He argued that Jonas should be moved to a secure military facility, that Lyra should remain confined to the palace, and that public knowledge of the Ash Meridian records might destabilize the government. Several noble families had already demanded an investigation into the war. Veterans were gathering outside the capital. Foreign embassies wanted access to Jonas. One neighboring state had offered him honorary citizenship, a palace, and what its message described as 3 tasteful spouses. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Only 3? Elara ignored him with visible effort. And my daughter's health. One physician activated a hologram of Lyra's nervous system. Threads of gold light appeared along her spine and legs. Her neural responses have increased by 11% over the last 2 weeks. The changes are small, but measurable. Because of the park? Elara asked. We cannot prove causation. Increased emotional stimulation, voluntary movement attempts, and exposure to varied gravity fields may be activating dormant pathways. The second physician looked uncomfortable. Her Highness has spent years in controlled therapeutic environments. We may have controlled them too much. Lyra stared at the glowing image of her own body. Does that mean I will walk? Silence followed. Jonas hated that silence more than alarms. He crouched beside her. It means your body is learning something new. It does not mean anyone gets to promise the ending. Lyra nodded slowly. Elara looked at the ministers. The excursions continue. Vale protested, but the Queen's expression ended the discussion. Increase the guard presence discreetly, she ordered, and remove anyone from my daughter's path who treats her like cargo. That afternoon, the park was surrounded by hidden snipers, surveillance drones disguised as birds, and agents pretending to read newspapers upside down. Jonas carried Lyra along the familiar path while 6 guards attempted to remain unnoticed behind decorative shrubs. The bush on the left has armor, Lyra whispered. A rare species, Jonas said. Very aggressive during budget season. The day might almost have felt normal if not for the crowd waiting near the fountain. Veterans had gathered beneath the crystal trees, some human, others Illyrian, many wearing old unit insignia. They did not shout. They simply stood when Jonas approached. One elderly Illyrian soldier stepped forward and removed his cap. A long scar crossed his face. "Commander Vale," he said. "My battalion was on Kalis. We were told no one reached the weapon." Jonas shifted Lyra's weight on his back. "Someone did." The soldier's eyes filled. "We lived because of you. You lived because many people did their jobs and died doing them." The crowd lowered their heads. For a few seconds, the park became as quiet as the moon vault in the old recording. Then General Whiskers rushed from beneath a bench, collided with the veteran's boot, and emitted a triumphant mechanical chirp. The old soldier looked down. "Is that a combat unit?" "Elite," Lyra said. "He has defeated 2 statues and a medical drone." The tension broke into laughter. Jonas was grateful to the ridiculous machine. At the far edge of the park, however, Mara suddenly raised her weapon. A man in dark civilian clothing had pushed through the crowd, one hand hidden beneath his coat. Jonas turned before the guards reacted. He lowered Lyra into Teren's arms and crossed the distance with frightening speed. The stranger drew a compact energy pistol. Jonas caught his wrist, twisted, and drove him to the ground without firing a shot. The entire movement lasted less than 3 seconds. The weapon rolled across the grass. Vale, who had insisted on observing from a secure pavilion, screamed and ducked behind a table. "That was impressively fast," Teren said. "The scream?" Jonas asked. "Both." Palace guards seized the attacker. A scan revealed a noble intelligence seal beneath his collar. He had not come to kill Jonas. The pistol contained a neural paralysis charge designed to capture him alive. Elara arrived moments later, her fury colder than the weapon on the ground. "Which house?" she demanded. The prisoner smiled through bloodied lips. "You will learn soon enough." Jonas looked toward the rooftops and noticed 3 surveillance spheres retreating into the city. The attack had been meant to fail publicly. Someone wanted fear, division, and proof that the forgotten commander had become a danger to the throne. That evening, ministers demanded emergency powers. News networks replayed the attack from 12 angles. Commentators argued over whether Jonas was a hero, a weapon, or the beginning of a military revolt. Inside the palace, Lyra sat on her bed and concentrated until the toes of her left foot moved beneath the blanket. Elara covered her mouth, unable to speak. Jonas smiled. Again. Lyra tried once more. The movement was weak, but real. "I did it," she whispered. "You did." Outside, warships gathered above the capital and politicians sharpened old lies. But in the quiet room, the Empire's greatest victory was no longer hidden inside a dead moon. It was the movement of one small foot, and the laughter that followed when General Whiskers attempted to celebrate by driving directly into the wall. The conspiracy collapsed before dawn, not because the noble houses suddenly discovered conscience, but because General Whiskers wandered into a ventilation shaft and found the hidden transmitter they had used to coordinate their agents inside the palace. The little machine returned covered in dust, dragging a cable twice its own length, and broadcasting an encrypted confession through the public address system. For 7 minutes, every corridor heard Duke Sarev explaining how Jonas's return could be used to frighten the council, seize emergency powers, and place the Queen under military supervision. The confession ended with Sarev complaining that Minister Vale's hair made him look untrustworthy. Vale demanded that portion be removed from the official record. Queen Elara refused. By sunrise, Sarev and 6 conspirators were under arrest. The paralysis weapon had been traced to a private laboratory, and the surveillance spheres circling the park had been identified as part of an illegal intelligence network. The capital, which had spent the previous night preparing for civil war, woke to the humiliating news that the Empire had been saved by a broken maintenance robot. Lyra promoted General Whiskers to Field Marshal. Jonas argued that this would encourage him. "He already outranks you," she replied. "That seems politically dangerous. You entered an exploding moon, and still failed to avoid administration." The council demanded a public ceremony. partly to honor Jonas and partly to repair the damage caused by decades of lies. He refused twice. The third request came from Lyra, who sat in her floating chair with her hands folded, and informed him that if he did not attend, she would tell the entire empire he was afraid of speeches. Jonas had faced Veyran shock troops, collapsing reactors, and military cooks with experimental recipes, but he knew when defeat was unavoidable. The ceremony was held in the central plaza beneath a sky filled with hovering lanterns and silent starships. Veterans stood beside children. Palace guards lined the crystal avenues. Holographic screens projected the restored Ash Meridian records across every settled world in the Empire. For the first time, the names of the 11 soldiers who died inside Kalis were spoken publicly. Jonas stood beside Elara in a plain, dark uniform with no medals. When the crowd began cheering, his first instinct was to step backward. For years he had believed survival was something to apologize for, that peace meant disappearing before anyone could ask what the dead had paid for it. Then Lyra reached for his hand. He remained where he was. Elara addressed the Empire without ornament or excuse. She admitted that the throne had accepted a convenient lie, that brave people had been erased to protect alliances, and that gratitude delayed for 40 years was not justice. She ordered monuments renamed, pensions restored to forgotten families, and all sealed records of the Kalis operation opened. Then she turned to Jonas. "The Empire owes you more than it can repay." Jonas looked across the plaza at the faces of soldiers who had carried the same silence for decades. "Then do not repay me," he said. "Remember them, and stop building palaces with stairs everywhere." The plaza went quiet. Lyra covered her mouth, already laughing. Elara's long ears tilted slightly, the only sign that the queen was fighting a smile. "Is that your formal request?" "My second request is fewer speeches." "Denied." The crowd laughed, and the sound loosened something in him that years of solitude had not healed. Elara offered him rank, land, and a place on the royal council. He refused the rank, distrusted the land, and described the council position as a threat. In the end, he accepted a simpler title, Royal Mobility Advisor, an office created that morning and defined mostly by Lyra as the person who carries me wherever I choose. He also received funding for public parks, accessible transport paths, and experimental neural therapy centers across the empire. The physicians never promised that Lyra would walk fully, but her progress continued. Weeks later, at the old silver-leafed tree, she stood for 3 trembling seconds, with Jonas supporting one arm and Elara holding the other. Her legs shook, her face tightened with effort, and the medical drone began reciting 17 emergency warnings at once. "Silence," Elara ordered. The drone immediately obeyed. Jonas looked impressed. "I have been trying that for months." Lyra took one small step, then another. On the third, she collapsed against Jonas, laughing and crying at the same time. He caught her before she touched the ground. Elara knelt beside them. No crown, no guards, only a mother pressing her forehead to her daughters. They knew the road ahead would remain difficult. Some days Lyra's legs responded. Some days they did not. But the palace no longer measured her life only in medical results. She attended lessons in the park, raced anti-gravity kites with other children, and allowed General Whiskers to terrorize visiting diplomats. Jonas repaired machines in a larger workshop near the gardens, though he was rarely alone. He had come to Orith's Reach to disappear, convinced that attachment was another form of loss. Instead, a lonely princess had given him a reason to be present, and a queen who once knew him only as a name in a dead archive had taught him that being remembered did not always mean being used. One evening, beneath the 3 rising moons, Lyra climbed onto his back for the familiar journey home. "I can walk a little now," she said. "You can. So you will not stop carrying me?" Jonas adjusted her carefully. "Not until you become unbearably heavy. I am a princess. I can have you arrested." Elara walked beside them, smiling. For once, I would approve. General Whiskers raced ahead, struck a statue, and fell over with ceremonial dignity. Jonas looked at the Queen, the child on his back, and the glowing city beyond the trees. For the first time since the war, he did not feel like the last survivor of a vanished unit. He felt like a man going home.